In Muharram al-Haram in the year 61 Anno Hijra, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad and with him the people of his household and his chosen companions were in a suffocating siege. Thousands of men armed with all weapons and armed with hateful fatwas against Imam Hussain, the family of Imam Hussain and the companions of Hussain. A negligent, hypocritical nation guided by money and terrified of the sword and believing rumors. Had they not been a nation of cowards, they would have not allowed this to happen to Imam Hussain, the family of Hussain, and the daughters of the Messenger of God. That was a nation of misfortune similar to a nation in our era. Today, Yemen has been living in Karbala for more than 5 years of daily killing, displacement, destruction, and suffocating siege, in which most of the humiliated Arab nation is hostage to the Saudi regime, themselves originally hostage to Zionism and strangled by the American regime. Yemenis live in a real Karbala. Yemeni children, men and women are dying every day and in brutal terrorist massacres in halls, mosques, markets, hospitals, and even prisons. Tens of thousands of brutal crimes and massacres committed by the Saudi aggression against the Yemeni people over a period of 5 years on a daily basis in most governorates of Yemen. A barbaric aggression that continues to commit genocide hysterically and does not exclude anyone from its war machine. The injustice against Yemen has shaken the pillars of the sky. In Yemen, there clusters the silence of the whole world, and the conscience of humanity has disappeared, except for a few brave men in the axis of resistance who have declared standing with the Yemeni people, considering Yemen as the Karbala of our day and age. What is happening in Yemen is the injustice of Karbala, the siege of Karbala, the thirst of Karbala, and the nation's abandonment of Karbala. Yes, Yemen lives in Karbala. However, Yemenis are experiencing a complete reversal of the image at the level of the confrontation. Courageous Yemenis over the course of the 5-year Saudi war against Yemen have broken the horns of Al Saud on the rocks and mountains of Yemen and have trampled their armored vehicles under their bare feet. Yemen will be our Karbala that broke the back of the enemy of our time. So how did Yemen become the Karbala of our time? To discuss this issue with us from Sydney is Jay Therapel, who is member of the Yemen Solidarity Council. Thank you very much, Jay, for being with us. Now, what motivated Imam Hussain alayhi salam to leave for Karbala was to make sure that the rule over the nation does not fall in the hands of the likes of Yazid. Now, al-Hussein went out announcing his revolution, which will remain obviously immortal over time, but so that successive generations will be able to draw lessons from the revolution by confronting injustice. How do you see this in Yemen today in comparison to the revolution of Karbala?
Well, this comparison is made by the Ansarullah movement themselves, because there are so many parallels between what they've endured since the victory of their revolution in September 2014 and the events leading up to Karbala. Firstly, Imam al-Hussein never took up arms against Yazid. Rather, it was Yazid that took up arms against Hussain and the al-Bayt, culminating in the massacre at Karbala. Similarly, Ansarullah never took up arms against the former Yemeni government. Instead, it was that government under the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh that took up arms against Ansarullah. Even US think tanks like the RAND Corporation admit that Ansarullah were acting within the boundaries of the laws and constitution, and that the only reason Saleh responded to this political challenge with brute military force in 2004 is because he was being pressured to do so by the US and Saudi Arabia. They used military force to combat a political ideology because they knew the Ansarullah movement resonates with millions of Yemenis who believe their country has been kept artificially poor and reduced to a reserve army of cheap labor for the Saudi economy. Secondly, on the day of Ashura, the Ansarullah movement also remembers its own martyrs, beginning with the founder of Ansarullah, Sayyid Hussain al-Houthi, who was brutally murdered along with his family members and followers by the Saleh regime. Finally, in the words of Imam Ali, be like the flower that gives its fragrance to even the hand that crushes it. Today, the same Yemeni army that was sent to crush Ansarullah are now fighting shoulder to shoulder with them in defense of their nation.
Jay, Imam Hussein knew that his enemies were despicable, they were foolish. He used to see that those who came to fight him were nothing but a bunch of gangsters of Kufa seeking maybe to obtain a trivial or maybe some sort of a despicable gift that drove them to this course and to commit this grave crime. I cannot but think about the mercenaries brought about from everywhere, especially from the continent beside Asia, which is Africa, brought by al-Saud to kill Yemenis. How do Yemenis, especially the National Defense Forces here, view those mercenaries, and how do they deal with them when they detain them?
From what I've seen, the Yemenis who support the government in Sana'a, they view the mercenaries as people who just want to get paid, like the soldiers who fought for Yazid, as you mentioned. Mercenaries will do anything for money, even if it means assassinating people they don't even hate, or smuggling Yemen's oil to pay for the US-Saudi aggression, which is what mercenaries operating out of the Shabwa province have been accused of doing just 2 days ago. Apart from this, the Ansarullah movement also maintains that many of these mercenaries have been tricked. So according to Muhammad Ali al-Houthi, a member of the Supreme Political Council, many Sudanese mercenaries in particular were told that they would be defending the two holy cities in the Saudi-occupied province of Hijaz, let's call it that. But then they ended up winding up in Yemen. So many of these mercenaries are potentially even slave soldiers. The UAE has done the same thing. So according to the TRT News, which is Turkish, the UAE advertises security jobs. Then when people arrive, they get forcibly sent to a military training camp before being shipped off to Yemen. So it's not just the Ansarullah movement making these accusations. As for how they're treated when they're detained, I wouldn't know, but slaves and mercenaries don't want to die. So I'm guessing there are very large numbers of them in Yemeni captivity because they'd much rather surrender, and that their conditions are not better or worse than what the average working class Yemeni is experiencing as a result of this genocidal blockade.
Well, J1, do you realize that one can look at the Hussein revolution in reality with just two perspectives? The first one reveals the apparent movement of Hussein bin Ali, which he undertook in the face of corruption, deviant, unjust, and repressive governments, the government of Yazid at that time. As for the core and depth of the issue, which is the second view, reveals the greatest and deepest movement because it is against man's ignorance and delusion. When will the Saudis, or is it even possible for the Saudis to wake up from this delusion and quit killing their brother Yemenis?
It's no secret that Saudi Arabia is looking for a face-saving exit strategy, and even that's collapsing. The UAE-backed southern separatist movement no longer wants to partner with the Saudis in any future power-sharing deal, which is a huge blow. The UAE is now attempting to appease Iran, and the Saudis having to slash the budgets of their own ministries by 20 to 30%. I read about all of this on Al Jazeera, which further highlights the growing isolation of Saudi Arabia, given that Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece of the Qatari regime, which also has terrible relations with Saudi Arabia now. So at best, I think we can expect Saudi Arabia to walk away from this acting like they've won. So I think something like that is possible.
Well, Jay, what's really interesting and really beautiful at the same time is despite the heavy blows that is being dealt by all Yemeni societies, every year we still see waves of mourners flocking the streets in most of the Yemeni provinces commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. It is as if the martyrdom is what keeps them sane while facing this war machine by Saudi Arabia and co. How much of a neglected factor do you think these revolutionary movements are to the enemies of Yemen?
You know, on the contrary, I think the revolutionary content of the Ansarullah ideology is fully acknowledged by the enemies of Yemen as a political threat. And that's why they're spending $50 million a day trying to erase it from the history books, precisely because history makes Saudi Arabia very insecure. Look at it from the Saudi perspective. The Ansarullah movement belongs to the Zaydi branch of Islam. They named themselves after Zayd ibn Ali, who is Imam al-Hussein's grandson. 60 years after Karbala, the Zaydi rebellion brought down the Umayyad Caliphate. So naturally, Saudi Arabia will fear the Ansarullah ideology, because at the center of their politics is the belief that all Muslims have an obligation to rebel against corrupt and unjust rulers. When the Umayyads seized power after the assassination of Imam Ali, they felt insecure because they knew that so long as the household of the Prophet was still alive, the masses of people would not accept the legitimacy of their regime. Similarly, today, the House of Saud has never not felt insecure about its legitimacy as a state, because it was founded by conquest and genocide, and it only exists today because it has the backing of the US and Britain. So without the backing of the big tyrant, the small tyrant knows that it can't survive.
I want to thank you very much, Jay Therapel, member of the Yemeni Solidarity Council, for joining us. This has been a short interview, but I hope that we talk more about this in the upcoming weeks and about the Yemeni face of Karbala of our time. Thank you very much for joining us, and please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideast Stream.